Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Prime Use series of interviews with top business and technology experts. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Rory Blundell, who is CEO at Gravitee, a company that builds robust platform for API management. Rory, thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
Thank you, Dana. It's a pleasure to be here. Lovely to speak with you all, and you've really built me up a lot, saying that you have business leaders and stuff like that. So hopefully, I can live up to the expectation and some of your previous guests.
Sure, I'm more than sure about that. So I'd like to jump right in. I've been following some news, and I could see that Gartner has just recently released their 2024 report, Voice of the Customer report for
Yeah,
API management, and your company is standing out, right, in this report as 100% of the customers were willing to recommend Gravity.
yeah.
So can you tell us what is it that is so appealing in your product, in your tool to the customers?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Like, obviously, from my perspective, I'd probably disentangle the product alongside the support and service that they get from the company as well, and the people in the company. So I think both are fundamentally important as to why our customers really love Gravity. The first thing I would say that on a personal level, actually, I it's a massive amount of pride I would say that I take in the fact that we were able to achieve that score. It's a huge. I absolutely love our customers. Not I really care about our customers is a better thing to say. Actually, I really really do care about our customers. I hate letting people down. I hate ever doing that sort of thing. So I think a large part of it is partly the values that I probably instilled in the organization, in that we really, really do try to do everything we possibly can for our customers. The second thing, though, in terms of the platform, coming back to your actual question, Gravity is a really, really solid and powerful platform, I would say. If you obviously you just asked about Gartner and their voice of customer and stuff like that, but if you go back to the last Gartner Magic Quadrant as well, the last Gartner Magic Quadrant, alongside each quadrant, they have this thing called the critical capabilities that they produce. And if you look at the critical capabilities, actually, the most recent one, it's pretty interesting because Gravity consistently scores very, very highly. In actual fact, I think when you look at it across all of the different factors, and I think there are maybe 5 or 6 factors, like pillars that they look at across that. Gravity scored in the top, I think it was 3 or 4 in pretty much all of them. And the only companies that came ahead of Gravity were massive, massive monolithic companies that probably spend millions and millions a year with Gartner. And so, from our perspective, it's obviously people recognize the value of the platform in the sense that it is really the full lifecycle API management sides of things, which I would classify as like API 1.0, if you will. We do that incredibly well. But on top of that, the platform now has the capabilities with things like the event native capability. So event native API management. So you have the ability to pull in any of your Kafka topics or any of your streaming services, let's say, and provide a consistent layer of building, managing, monitoring, securing, exposing, and consuming. You can do all of that sort of stuff in the Gravity platform now, which is very unique. But on top of that, what our customers really are starting to adopt a lot is this concept that we've just introduced, in actual fact, and we're just going to be announcing it in a few weeks' time. Is what we call federation, essentially. So now you can plug in any broker, any gateway, effectively, and start to be able to provide a consistent layer of discoverability, security, of everything like that on top of any broker that you may have or any gateway that you may have as well. And so it's those things. I think we do the fundamentals of API management incredibly well. We are thought leaders and we really push the boundaries from an API management perspective in terms of event native, and also taking that even further in terms of federation. And then beyond that, from our perspective, we're very much looking at an AI forward position as well. So we're looking at things like, once you've got this federated environment, how do you stitch all of these bits together and do that in an automated way to enable true self-service for people? and how do you do things like intelligent traffic shaping, all of those sorts of things, very much the forefront of why Gravity's customers love the platform. But why they, I think, love the company is the platform, but also the people associated with the company and what we try to do and how we try to help them. And so the team at Gravitee gets a lot of credit for that sort of stuff.
And you already touched a little bit on that. It's about the magic quadrant. And I can see that Gravitee was recognized as a visionary for API management. So you mentioned that there is a team, right, that gets a lot of credit. Also, the culture that you have managed to instill for your company and the way you are supporting your customers, right, that you are listening to them. Is there anything else that actually separates you from the legacy vendors in API management and the Gravitee? What is it that helps you stand out?
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's a good question. I think you can honestly you can overthink a lot of these sorts of questions and answers. My honest opinion is that we do the basic stuff better than other people. We are thought leaders in the more complex stuff like event native and stuff like that. So from a platform perspective, and with the AI forward positioning that we take, that's very strong. And as you say, the people, I really think it is the combination of product and people. That is really what drives our customers to be successful, and why I think they adopt Gravitee very successfully, and why they really like working with us, generally speaking. I could give longer answers in relation to that, but my honest perspective is that we work tirelessly for our customers to be able to make sure they are successful. And I'm always of the opinion, if I'm sure many of my team members probably find me a little bit annoying or something, like the amount that I always want to look at customer stuff and things of that nature, because I really care about the customers. But I think it's that level of attention that we provide to all of our customers across the board that I hope they feel that sense of belonging within Gravitee, because we really care about them. And I know that the team that we have at Gravitee really cares about them deeply. And so I think it is that combination of technology and of the people.
I know that Gravitee was founded on the principle of simplifying API technology.
Mm-hmm.
Rory, what challenges and you have identified prior in this specifically domain prior to creating your company, and how have you addressed those challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a good question. If you go back, I don't know, let's say 10, 15. So let's go back a bit further, actually. Let's go back like 15, 20 years or so. So the early 2000s. People were very familiar with using huge, like monolithic pieces of architecture. And typically the sort of Windows 1995 type of experience, sort of like really, really basic, sort of like, I'm sure people are familiar with those sorts of experiences. But our perspective was that, David, Nicola, Titwan, and Aziz, who were the founders of Gravitee, I wasn't actually a founder. I came into the business in 2020. They fundamentally felt, if you go way back when, they were working actually as consultants for large French retailers. So the business originally was French, and they were doing POCs with a number of different vendors, and they found that they were sort of clunky. In order to be able to use them, you had to deploy a lot of architecture, all this sort of stuff. They were heavy duty. They weren't particularly lightweight. They were also sort of complex in the way the user experience was designed, and stuff like that. So as I said, that sort of Windows 1995 experience, you've got tabs everywhere, things you're trying to deal with, etc. And they set about changing that. I remember, so David, who was one of the first people that probably put some code down, who's our CTO, he wanted, that sort of famous old adage, he wanted to scratch his own itch, because it was, he felt that the amount that people were paying for something that was a suboptimal experience essentially for them he didn't like, and he was frustrated by that. So he built the gateway actually and the API, the first version of the API management platform, because he wanted to provide something that was more cost effective, easier to use, that fundamentally enabled people to be able to build, deploy, secure, all those sorts, to expose their APIs in fewer button clicks and more intuitively. That's really what he was looking to do, and he did that very successfully. Now, with the introduction of things like event native and stuff like that, it becomes a much, much, much bigger ecosystem and a much more complex problem that you're solving. And so it's always something that we have to continue to strive to improve upon, actually, is this that user experience and things of that nature. But that's really the history, and how we came about trying to actually make things easier in the last sort of 5-6 years in an API management context.
I have a few questions while you were answering, questions pop up in my head. So first of all, I'm really curious to know about your background. We started with the Gartner and the recognition of Gravitee, but you mentioned that you were not among the initial founders of the organization you joined 4 years ago. I would be curious to know more about yourself, your background, and what actually led you to this position at Gravitee.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm more than happy to answer that. So my background is that I'm a bit of a, what you'd call a jack of all trades, master of none. So I, I'm not a sort of specialist in a lot of different things, but I'm sure my management team would say that I sort of annoy them to an extent. I get involved in everything in the business. But my background actually is that I've done a lot of different jobs. So I started life working more in professional services, and when I say professional services, I more mean like law, banking, stuff like that, in the City of London. And then honestly, I was just bored. I was very bored by it, and I had an idea for a piece of software, and I decided to write a piece of software that we then sold to a few different companies and stuff like this. And this was put the house on the market, slept on my mum's sofa, all that sort of stuff when I was, I don't know, maybe when I had some hair. And and I definitely had hair actually at that particular point in time. And that was back in, I don't know, maybe 2015, 2013, 2014, something like that. So I basically built a piece of software, and for a variety of reasons, that company I decided to shut down. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, you should come and join me at this company." There was another middleware vendor. Basically, the company that I founded previously was effectively doing ELT or ETL, as we thought of it then. Though, so I'm trying to remember what ETL actually stands for: extract, transform, and load. And so we were taking data from different sources, transforming it, and loading it somewhere else. Basically, that was effectively what we did. The first startup that I created, and what I ultimately found by doing that was that when we closed it down, one of my friends, who was my CTO there at the time, who actually works for Gravitee, I should say, he basically said to me, "Hey, you should come and join this other company that was doing." I honestly, I didn't really know about ETL properly at that particular point in time. I didn't really know about solution engineering or all these sorts of things. This was probably, I don't know, about, goodness me, I've been here 4 years. That was probably about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago. And I said, "Okay, yeah, sure, I'll turn my hand to it and I'll give it a go." And I joined him there, and I ultimately took over as the sort of running a lot of the European or EMEA operations, I would say, for that organization. It was like Series E funded, largish middleware vendor, basically. And when I was there, I was frustrated by their API strategy, is the honest answer. And I remember speaking with people in the organization saying, "Hey, we should go and do something about API management." And I slightly naively thought, well, I was frustrated. They tried to build partnerships with a number of different legacy API management vendors who tried to charge them lots of money. and they didn't want to do that. And I was frustrated by this because we were losing opportunities in API management. And I thought, well, as I said naively, I'll go and build something. And so one Saturday afternoon, I just went on to GitHub and decided to go and find a number of different open source frameworks that I could use to extend to be able to create their API management. So, or at least show them a POC that we could do something. And so I did this, and one afternoon I discovered, it was just one Saturday afternoon, I discovered Gravitee. I didn't know it before that. And this was probably 6 years ago, maybe. And I downloaded it, I installed it, started using it, and I was genuinely amazed at the ease of use, at the amount of capability they had actually built into the platform. And I was amazed at how much they had given for free, in actual fact, is the honest answer, in the open source version. And so I installed it and downloaded it. And the first thing I did was like, right, okay, I'm going to send these guys an email because I want to get to know them. In actual fact, Nicola and David, two of the co-founders, told me not too long ago they found the very first, actually, apparently it wasn't an email. I'm lying. Apparently I actually made a GitHub question or bug request or something like that. I can't remember the name of it. But, and they actually, in a presentation, they actually brought it up, and it was in like 2018 or something like this. And so anyway, I said to them, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. I would like to come and meet you. And I took a train, because I was living in London at the time. I took a train to Lille, which is where the company was founded. And I just met David. So David was the CTO, and we really got on well. We were both very opinionated about the API management market. This was probably back in 2018, 2019. And over the course of a couple of years with that previous company, I built a partnership for Gravitee with that company. And then after a couple of years of doing that, I decided that I was going to leave the other company for a variety of reasons. And then I was actually running an opportunity in Kenya, in Nairobi. And very bizarrely, Gravitee had an opportunity in Nairobi with a bank as well. And I remember myself being on a laptop in a cab going across Nairobi, basically trying to prepare for a meeting for Gravitee as well at the same time. And I think they realized through that process that maybe I could help them, because maybe I was crazy enough to do that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I that was from that point forwards, I joined the company on the first day of lockdown. My wife and I had just moved house, and I took a massive pay cut, huge pay cut, probably about 50% pay cut to come to Gravitee, because I thought that I had an opinion about what we could do. And that was about just almost, not exactly, but just about 4 years ago. And I joined, and there was 5-6 people at Gravitee, and we probably, very small amount of revenue, mainly out of France, to be honest. And pretty much by any metric, whether it's revenue, whether it's staff, headcount, logos, whatever it is, we've grown the company in 3.5-4 years by about, 20 to 30 times. And that's that's the story of Gravitee, or at least my part in Gravitee, I should say.
This is an absolutely fascinating story. I've never heard this kind of that in a way you were looking for API tool, you found it on the open source platform. And by being able to recognize the value of the platform, of the tool, you were able to log some customers, and join the company. And that is a fascinating story. Thanks for sharing that, Rory. You mentioned about the open source.
Yeah,
open source component is very important to Gravitee. Even till these days. So how do you manage the balance between the open source and the commercial component of the business?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's not easy. You always have to. I think we always try to be true to the open source principles. And broadly speaking, from a Gravitee perspective, we really do value the input of the community and stuff like this. How do we balance it? We have a very structured development and product related process, actually. So generally speaking, the long-term product strategy is set by myself, David, who's our CTO, who I mentioned, and Linus, who's our field CTO. So the three of us really sit down, talk with each other. There's also a few other guys who really, some of our solution engineers and our product marketing guys, etc. They all sort of contribute to that, into the vision and where we're going and stuff like this. And what we then do is, once we've done that and we've been a bit crazy and we're like, oh, we're going to go and build all this sort of stuff, then what they actually do is it gets handed to our product teams. And our product teams, we've created this process that we call ideate, build, and release, which is a very structured process essentially for how we develop software. And the ideate process is ultimately sort of designed to idiot proof to some extent what we should build, and that we don't waste engineers' time on certain things. And so the idea is they do things like PR FAQs and all this sort of stuff, to make sure that and POCs to make sure that what we're building is the right stuff. Now, coming back to your question about open source to enterprise, what we always do as part of that ideate journey is we're always looking at, okay, what is the balance here? Should this be an open source component? Should it be enterprise? All that sort of stuff. There's not really an easy answer. Generally speaking, if it's something that's very, very core to the gateway, because the gateway is open source, and so are many of the components that sit around it. If it's something that's very core to it that it needs in order to be able to operate, then usually you have to make it open source. If it's something that we feel is about creating an enhanced experience, for example, then generally speaking with that, we will make that enterprise. And so there isn't a hard and fast rule, but we look at each thing on a case-by-case basis. So the Gravitee API gateway is the brain, let's say, is the best way to think. If you think of it in an analogy of a human, the API gateway is the brain really of what is going on. And that component is open source. And so if there are things that are really fundamental to how the brain operates, basically, then typically that will remain and always be open source.
Yeah, maybe you could share with us some of the case studies or success stories of your customers that have benefited from leveraging your tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to do so. So if you look, for example, in some of the, very interesting one actually that is we're doing quite a lot of work with at the moment as a big migration away from one of the legacy vendors is the Dutch postal service called PostNL. They actually, so one of their main use cases was about, they started off by simply migrating I say simply, it was a very, very large project. They migrated away from one of the biggest sort of software companies around and everything onto Gravitee. And ultimately where they were moving to was about providing, if you think about the experience that you have with Uber and stuff like this, where you get real-time updates and stuff like that, the ability to be able to track parcels and understand where things are at with people in real time and stuff like that. That's exactly what they're doing now with Gravitee. So that's the event native side of things. So they have the ability, and in actual fact, we're doing that sort of stuff with the Swiss Postal Service as well. So quite interesting. We actually did a recording yesterday ourselves for our virtual online event. So that basically they were talking with each other, these two postal services, talking about how they are, making things real time and event based and all this sort of stuff. And so they're very good examples from a Gravitee perspective, how companies that are, a lot of people would typically think of as like, delivering mail and stuff like this, how they're digitizing and creating these huge digital organizations, really with the power of Gravitee for the future. So there's a huge amount of stuff. And we've got loads of, there's a great example of one in the US, which is, unfortunately, I'm not able to say the name, but it's a very large sports league that all of your listeners would be very familiar with. And what they wanted to do was start to monetize a lot of their real-time data in actual fact. And so they started putting chips into players' jerseys to be able to track how, sell that data to betting agencies ultimately, and to give enhanced user experience and things like that. And so they didn't have the ability to do that with their other vendors, essentially the other API management vendors, because it was all about real time and stuff like that. And so that was really where Gravitee came in, is we were able to do that. Now, one of the really interesting things is, you mentioned, for example, earlier AWS API Gateway, actually, Dana, and that's very interesting from our perspective, because what I mentioned coming all the way back to the beginning, that I said we've introduced this new concept of federation and things of that nature. Well, take one of these organizations as an example. So it's very common when you're dealing with very large organizations that typically Gravitee is dealing with, that they will not have a single solution across the whole company. You may have one team over there that wants to deal with one particular solution, for example. You've got another team over here that wants to deal with something a little bit different. Well, the challenge that comes is, centrally as a company, how do you provide one central pane of glass, one single pane of glass? How do you provide what you would typically call platform engineering, like one consistent layer for baseline policies and stuff like this? Now, what Gravitee can do with federation is you can plug in AWS API Gateway, you can plug in all these other gateways and other brokers. So now you have that ability. So you look at this big sports league, you look at these other organizations that I just mentioned, such as PostNL or Swiss Post, all these people. Plug in your Kafka brokers, plug in your AWS API Gateway, plug in Gravity's Gateway, all these different things. And you have one central place to build, to manage, to monitor, secure, to expose and consume. So we've got over, I think, 200 customers worldwide or so now. And we're doing a lot of different stuff with many, many large organizations around the world. And, it's amazing to be able to do it.
Yeah, Rory, it sounds like a huge differentiator in the market, right? Being able to unify and provide the visibility in a single pane of glass to your customers, right? Diversified management tools, right? So that is something that should be standing out and setting you apart among these heavy hitters, right? Like MuleSoft or
certainly our thinking.
Yeah. So Rory, what are the future advancements, right? What do you see or foresee, and what are your strategies, right, to maintain this leadership in the market? You mentioned about the AI enhancements. Maybe you could share with our listeners a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's all completely top secret, so I can't share anything at all. No, I'm joking. But from our perspective, there's a few really interesting things. Like, AI is obviously on the tip of everyone's tongue at the moment. Everyone's obviously talking about AI, but more so than just that, I think if we talk about it, so let's go back to the federation point, right, that I just made a minute ago, and I'll then build on from there. So if you think about the federation stuff, you've plugged in all of these different gateways. So you mentioned MuleSoft, you've spoken about AWS API Gateway, you've got Gravitee, you've got a few other vendors out there. None obviously as good as Gravitee, I should add. So when you plug all of these different things into Gravitee, my view is that what do people want to do at that particular point in time? What are they just going to sit there and go, oh great, that's done, we're finished now, we don't do anything more with APIs and our data streams? I don't think so. I think that there's a lot more to come. And my view is that where people will want to go is say, oh, okay, so I've now got all of these different things plugged into one place. I want one field from there, and I want to join it with one field from here, and I want to join it with one field from there. And being able to do that in an automated way, potentially with things like natural language processing, powering it and stuff like that, is very interesting from my perspective. And we're taking later in this year, we're taking the first steps on all that sort of stuff with what we would call federated API products. Okay, so when you start to be able to create a federated product of all of these different sources of data, and then being able to do that in an automated way, and being able to stitch all these different fields together, utilizing things like AI and what we call in Gravitee Newt AI, because our little thing, I don't actually have any idea what it is, but our little mascot thing is called Newt, and so we helpfully called it Newt AI. And so every aspect of the platform will be touched by Newt AI. And so ultimately, one of the areas that we're looking at is exactly this, is about that automated stitching, federated products, all that sort of thing. That's a huge aspect from our perspective. There are many others that we are particularly looking at. You know, one of the things that people don't necessarily always recognize or realize about Gravitee, I should say, is that we aren't just an API gateway or an API management solution. We've actually also got an identity and access management solution that's built to open banking standards. And that's really powerful. There's another use case that I could talk about. You asked me about customer case studies, like Tide Bank in the UK, for example. They use Gravitee's API gateway for many things, but the identity and access management server is exactly one of those. And the same with Prospera Credit Union in Canada. So all of this sort of stuff to do with like open banking and things like that, Gravitee is very well placed from that perspective. And so when you look at from an AI perspective, things like time travel things. So time travel means like, oh, I've just logged into a device here and now it's suggesting in 1 second's time I'm in North Carolina, for example. That's physically impossible for me to be able to get there in that particular point in time. So we've got a lot of different stuff to come from the Gravitee platform perspective, but that's just a teaser of some of the stuff that we've got coming. And I think in the near term, one of the big things that we're releasing, and I can't say loads and loads about it, but we've got something called the Kafka Gateway that we're releasing in the next couple of weeks, and that's super exciting from our perspective. That will enable people to get all of the experience that you really expect from an API management capability of building, managing, monitoring, securing, exposing, and consuming, but natively on top of your Kafka topics, basically.
Rory, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your experience, your incredible path to Gravitee, and how you actually, and your vision. Thank you.